You are listening to Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, episode 111, Blind Spots. In today's episode, I introduce the new solo format and talk about blind spots. I discuss how to identify them and discuss what I believe are some of my own. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome into the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and today we're going to be talking about blind spots. But before we do, I'd like to give you some updates for the podcast. Thank you for the well wishes to Jared. I've delivered the messages that were sent to us from various different people. We really do appreciate it. Definitely made him happy to know that his experience working on the podcast was well received, and he's doing really well. I'll keep sharing them as they come in, but they've really lifted up his spirits. Also, for me, I'm beginning my work on my next game for our detective series. We've talked about our detective series a lot in the past. This is sort of it's our Mortals game in the World of Darkness setting that we've got. And so we got the rotating GM thing going on. I think Jared has probably 2 to 4 sessions of his game going on before I have to step up to the plate, or Brian has to step up to the plate. And Brian generally is busier than both of us, so makes it harder for him to get games out there. But I'm working on my next game for our detective series. The name is Sanguine. I will share updates with you on that as we proceed. I'm also looking for a way to introduce to our investigation game ways that involved. So I introduced a mechanic for time travel in our game. We talked about how our lighthouse is sort of the TARDIS concept there, and then I gave it the ability to travel through space and time. And I did like a one-shot game to show that it could now travel through time. And I did that to open up for my kind of current chronicle, or disjointed chronicle. And but one of the roadblocks, one of the things that becomes challenging when you introduce time, especially in an investigation game, is how do you force the players to go back in time or forward in time and act on a case that, or investigate a case. One, because they're fish out of water in that location. I mean, they usually are. But two, how you handle perhaps the butterfly effect with that, and also, giving it meaning to the characters, meaning that their actions, that's where the butterfly effect kind of thing comes in, where their actions do affect the current state, or you are trying to rectify problems that you have effectively caused. So, if anybody's ever done something like that, I'm probably going a little Chrono Trigger here with my actions, if you're familiar with the game. But go ahead and give me your thoughts. That'd be interesting. levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. Also, co-host update. I talked with my friend Tom, who I do board games with. He also ran our 7th Sea game on Thursday nights. And he sounds like he's interested. We're going to work out some of the details, so he might show up for a couple episodes here and there. And then I've got another friend I'm talking to this week, and I'm going to reach out to another friend as well. So it's 4 people that I've got in the wings here. And we'll kind of try to get some rotating co-hosts in here, give you some fresh perspectives on different things. And they are very different GMs from what Jared and I are. So it'll definitely give you a good perspective. And I could probably get some players, too, or even people who are not as well-versed in the community, perhaps. And so to give you, new player perspective, stuff like that. But yeah, that's it for the updates right now. And so we'll go right into the main topic, which, again, is blind spots. And I talked about this last week when I was letting you know about the future of the podcast. And I said, well, let's go ahead and start with this episode topic on blind spots as a whole. And, not just, what is a blind spot? And if you don't know what a blind spot is yet, you probably haven't taken driver's ed, or, you probably, you haven't hit that age limit where you're familiar with the familiar with what the concept is, but the blind spot is, something you can't see. You're blind to it. It's obviously it's in the name. I don't even know why I'm explaining what a blind spot is, but there it is. And so the question is, how do you identify them? Obviously, if you're blind to them, you have no concept of them being there. They are your blind spots. So how can you identify them? Well, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to try to ask your table every session, every other session, whether you're a player or a GM, ask your table for feedback on your gaming or on your GMing style. And I would say ask your regular table, not a table that you play with, a pickup game, or a table that you play with, non-regularly. And the reason why I say that is that the problem is that people are generally kind face to face. So, you're not going to, it's hard for people to give you, or come up with the courage to give you criticism, to a game that maybe you ran at a con, or, a game that maybe you're doing a one shot for a group just out of kindness, or a charity game, something like that. People are just generally not as willing to come up to you and give you this, brutal honesty, like these are the things I like, these are the things I didn't like. But your main group, if they're your friends, they will be more, they'll be more apt to say, these are the things that, we liked, these are some of the things we didn't like. And they'll be more open and comfortable giving you criticism, especially if you've, been with them for a long time. And you've sort of fostered this kind of open communication for criticism. You'll know it. The other thing that you can do then is game or session retrospective, and I'd encourage any GM to do this, even any player to do this, which is, how did I play? If I'm a player, how did I play in that session? At the end of the game, how did I play in that game? How was my character? What did I think about my choices for that character and the growth of that character, all of that. And then for a GM, session retrospective is huge. So the feedback from the table can kind of bleed into this, but even if you don't have the feedback from the table, the session retrospective is, you're just looking at how do people react to different things. Maybe you jot down a note here or there as you go through your different points in the night, and you go like, I got serious engagement from this thing I did. I had crickets from this thing I did. That kind of gives you an idea of like, okay, well, what about that wasn't good? Okay, should I try it again? And if you can then combine that with the criticism from the table, or the constructive criticism, you just don't people tell you that your game sucks, but constructive criticism at the table is what's going to kind of foster that. And so with your game retrospective, you can kind of see like, okay, what am I doing well, and what am I not doing well? And if you get no criticism or no critique from your table, then, you can say, well, I've always wanted to try X. Is that something that I can do? Is that something that I'm doing right now? Am I getting good feedback with this style that I'm working on right now? And so you should always be looking at that, and you should always say, okay, what should I try and do next to level up my gaming? You want to see like, where do I take it next? Where do I push the envelope next? Maybe my NPCs are very bland and generic. And bland and generic NPCs, they're all bland and generic, and they all have 3-letter names: Bob, Joe, Tom, Tim. That sort of thing. And they're just super flat, one-dimensional people, and you're just like, what? I need to change these NPCs and make them more interesting. So be sure to look at your game every time you do it, especially if you run a successful game. We always had talked about, making sure that you get the end every game, even if the game's a total flop. Find a way to land that plane, okay? Because if you don't land it, then you're just crashing and burning in midair, and that's no good. You want to have a way to land it so you can look back at it and go, okay, where did I go wrong? in general, you'll know where you went wrong. Maybe it was, you kill the character out of spite or malice. You got into an argument with someone and it was irreconcilable. Like there's all sorts of things, or maybe you just kind of lost the thread of your story and you couldn't keep the game going. Either way, that retrospective is going to try to help you identify the blind spots. Obviously, you are blind to them, so you probably don't know what you don't know. But looking back on your game, you should be able to get some feeling for how your game went and things that you maybe want to work on. And you're like, I did not address that in the game, or I did not address this feeling, emotion, this concept, these thoughts in the game. Like those are things that you can see then if you put them out there after the game is done or after the session is done. The other thing that you can do is you can play in other games. And if you're a GM exclusively for your table, I urge you to go out and find a way to play in other games, whether that be from other players at your table or whether that be from going like online and playing in some games. If you know another group playing their games, if you go to cons, playing some one-shots. The reason why you need to play in other games is because you need to see how other GMs and DMs do this. If you don't witness the craft and you don't experience what it's like to sit on the other side of the table, you become blind to the things that you do. And that's really where most of the blind spots form. If you're always the DM, you don't know how hard it is sitting on the other side of the table. Like, oh, I am not describing X very good. This DM is really good at descriptions, and I am really not putting enough into my descriptions. And that's why my players are usually sitting there going like, I don't know, like what do we do? Do we go back to the bar and talk to the tavern guy again? There's a cave over there. You're sitting there like, come on, guys, like put it together. I gave you the key. Like, come on, you know what the key's for. Like your players don't know, okay? Because your descriptions probably were lacking, or you're missing context to give to your players. You're not slapping them in the face hard enough for the clue. Again, the experience that we've had is make it 2 steps stupider than what you think it is, because nobody thinks like you do. And the other one I heard was, always have 3 solutions for your problem. And that came from a mystery storytelling thing that showed up on a Slack group. I forgot the author's name who is for, but his solution was make it 3 solutions. Like if your key's behind a secret wall, make sure that like finding the secret door like with a spot check is one solution, talking to somebody is another solution, and then finding a map that says there's a secret door is another solution. Like there are 3 ways that you could solve this problem, and it is more likely that the players are going to land finding the problem. Again, you don't want players to miss clues or context to what's important to get your game flowing. If your game has no context, you have no lubricant to get the game moving. It's just like not putting oil in an engine. It's not going to work unless you have, I guess, an electric car. So again, play other games. You'll get to see how other DMs do it. And that's really important because you need to be able to see how other people share clues and share context. Also, you get to see kind of how it stacks up against your gaming style. Like, again, you might understand, or you might come to find that you do not put a lot of effort into your NPCs, but they do, okay? Ask them how they do it. Figure out how they do it, because that's something you want to get better at. Or you'll notice, like, you'll go like, oh, man, I really enjoyed this thing that the DM did, and you'll go, well, I should incorporate these things in my game. And again, I'll get to that on how you kind of incorporate or how you change things with your blind spots, but it's really important that you kind of see how the craft is done. You could watch somebody do it from a live perspective. There's a lot of like live play podcasts out there and all that. My challenge with live play podcasts and my critique of live play podcasts is they are highly produced. I almost don't feel in some cases that they are, you know, that there isn't some concept of like where they need to go and, thought already done ahead of time. Because there's no stumping the players usually in a live play podcast. They always seem to just know exactly what to do. And so again, highly produced content looks good. It sounds good. There's obviously a little bit of improv associated to it, but unless you're really, I mean, think about putting a camera on you guys, on yourself and your group playing a game. The amount of derailing, the amount of table talk, questioning of what's going on, it doesn't translate quite into that live play podcast. So if you can find a live play podcast that's more like watching what a real group would do, it's not this highly produced content. I'd say that's probably the best non-playing way to view additional content. But I mean, if you got nothing else, go ahead and listen to some live play groups on YouTube or out there in the world and see how they work on things for their game. Again, don't try to completely emulate what you see because you probably won't be able to do exactly what they do. And that's not a problem. It's not like again, they're highly produced productions that are built in that way. So that's why they're not the greatest food for thought and try to identify blind spots. The other thing you can do is you can tell a game if you've never GM'd. So if you're a player, you're trying to learn what your blind spots are as a player, you need to tell a game. Okay, whether that's a one shot, whether that's a 3-night thing, whether it's a full blown long chronicle, whatever it is, you do eventually need to sit down in the GM spot. And the reason why you need to sit down in the GM spot is because you don't understand or you don't have the appreciation for what it is on the other side of the table and what you need to sort of be thinking of and, considering as a player, like what the table is thinking of and how to guide and manage that table. If you don't have it, you also probably can't give your GM good critique because you don't see it from their perspective, and that's a problem. So what you have to do is you have to sit there, take a shot, sit down on the other side of that table, and GM a story at least once. And I urge every player to do this at least one time. Whether you never do it again, you need to do it one time because that story, that storytelling experience will just help inform you better how to be a better player as a whole. I think that my gameplay as a player has increased exponentially since I've begun GMing more stories. And I don't know if I got it from one experience GMing, but I definitely got it from multiple experiences GMing. I can now see better like what I am missing as a player. I also have a better understanding of sort of how game design works. And so I'm able to fit better into what the GM is trying to present to us and trying to figure out, like, how do you answer some questions? How do you get the subtle clues? The GM's like, okay, there's nothing else here. Like, move on. And, the types of questions you can ask. It will also help you if you are a very confrontational player with your GM, or maybe you argue about rules a lot. This will help you sort of break away from some of that. You'll start to understand like why maybe you should just kind of let the thing flow. Again, it depends on who your DM is and the type of style they have for your group. But, as long as your DM is not an adversarial GM, then you're going to be in a better spot just understanding kind of what their thought process is and how to kind of move their game along. It's not just to be like, I'm just going to follow your story, but it is to be able to pick up on the clues to work into their story and fit into their story better. So just a way for another player to kind of work through that. So what are some of my blind spots? Well, I've been able to identify that the length and complexity of my games is too short and generally not complex enough. And that sort of jumps into a level of preparation problem. I do not prepare as much as Jared has prepared for our games previously. I've seen that length and complexity is definitely a problem that I have in my games. I was able to identify that a long time ago in that I would always have a story and I would want to try to execute it really fast. And nobody, the players don't move at the speed of the GM, they move at the speed of the players. That doesn't mean that you want your players to crawl into the to the next part of your story forever. You also don't want your players to meander forever, but you do not want to force your players, because your players are going to tackle the threat in front of them is the thing. And so if your players are going to tackle the threat in front of them, you need to make sure that that they've had their time to sort of walk into that threat at their own appropriate speed. So that's what I talk about with length and complexity. And again, complexity comes down to the problem is that the game is too short in my cases, and I've been trying to identify ways to lengthen the game, at least make it more complex, and give the players more choices. Because once you catch the thread, you're on it. Your players will follow the thread once they've figured it out. The other thing that I have a problems with in my blind spots there are appropriate friction in my games. And I don't even know if this is technically a blind spot for me because my players haven't complained about it, but I think that this is something that I should be working on as a whole, which is that most NPCs are amenable to my players. And your players never really understand it unless you're sitting there because you don't know what the GM knows. So they might be like, oh, this guy's got it out for us. But, I'm sitting there, I'm like, this guy's basically answering everything that they want to have answered, which is good and bad. I state that, which is good and bad. It's good because if your players feel like they can trust the NPCs, they never check them for lies. And that's a good place to be in. It's a bad place to be in that, I want there to be a little bit more complexity to the NPC, that this NPC displays more emotions and more frustration to different things. So not just appropriate friction from the NPCs, but just giving the NPCs more depth as a whole. So that's something I do need to work on as well. And then cohesion to my overall stories. I get to the end of my stories and I try to explain them to Jared and Brian, and they never, complain about this, but I always feel like, boy, did I not really think through how to put this thing together as a cohesive block? I think that every DM has that sort of thing at the end of it where they go like, was it really that good? Like, I never really applauded and I was really happy with it, but was it really that good? So maybe I'm just being too hard on myself there, but definitely want to work on the cohesion of stories. Make sure that the clues, like, you find, the collar and you find the rosary and you're like, it was the priest all along. Like, we've talked about that before, but that cohesion is something that I think I need to work on. And then, as a player, for myself, I've talked about how I probably have taken metagaming too far on the other end, where I don't work on inference that my player might not know some of the complexity there. So, like, I always say, maybe I've gone too far at the other end of metagaming, which is like, I can't infer that. I don't know all the stuff in game. And it's like, well, Jared had told me you're capable of critical thought, so is your character. So the metagaming and going too far thing, there's always that fine line. Like, I've really, really thought about, heavy into not doing metagaming as a player, and trying to not do that wherever possible. And then breaking immersion in the game. I do joke around a lot at our table. And, I have noticed that, like, I'm like, maybe I should try to stay more immersed in the game as a whole. And then also character design for myself. I thought about, you know, I tend to have an archetype character that I like to play, and it's usually kind of like a social, mental, physical last character. Um, but I like that character design just because it fits best with the play styles that we end up going for at the table. But I always try to change it up a little bit, and that's the one I always have the most fun with. So I usually come back to them, and it's tough. It's tough to break that character design. It's also very tough if you have a bunch of players who are just like all physical players, and you need to have one mental player who's capable, uh, one mental social character who is capable of handling, the puzzles and the talking in the group, because everybody else plays the other archetypes. And you're like, great, I can never play, that barbarian. I can never play Ugg the barbarian because everybody else plays all the physical characters. And here I am. I feel like I have to play the bard, to make to give the lubrication that we need to get the grease to get the game flowing the way it needs to go. That's always something that I struggle with, but I also like playing that archetype, so it's tough. The other thing that I thought of, did I just lose it? I guess I did. I just lost that thought. But anyways, so now that I told you my blind spots, I've been able to sort of identify them. Again, they might not be my blind spots. But, because again, I am blind to them. But from things I've seen, I go, I'm not doing that well enough. So I'm going to call them my blind spots. So how do I correct those things, or how do you correct your blind spots? And so the first thing I wanted to warn you at, and we've talked about it in the podcast in the prior episode, so I'm going to keep harping on it here. And this is really important, is don't feel like you have to correct them all tomorrow. So just don't throw everything into your next story and go, or your next game session and go, haha, these are all the things I'm going to change. Like, boy, talk about, you don't want a 180 on your game style and your GM style. And, you don't want to do that, because that's going to totally screw up everything that's been going on in the game. Your players are going to look at you confused. Your GM's going to be like, what the heck have you done? I don't even know how to storytell for you anymore, because you're not playing the same character anymore. You've effectively just changed your character completely. So do not do it all too fast. Slow and steady. Pick an area that you want to work on. If you're a GM, pick an area as a player that you want to work on, and then go ahead and try to work. Just try to make some small changes here and there, just a little bit at a time. It's an incremental thing, especially because if you've been GMing for your table for a long time, the players are still excited to play game. Okay, you don't need to sit there and go, well, I really want to change all these things, and if I don't change them all, my players are going to be upset. Well, if you do change them all right away, your players are going to be like, what the heck is going on? You're probably going to get more criticism by changing them all too fast. But doing them a little bit at a time, you can sort of elicit the right feedback. You can let your players know, hey, I tried to change this thing. Or you guys had mentioned this. I tried to do this. What did you guys think about it? And that's the best way to get the right feedback there. Whether it be through, again, the session, the game as a whole. If you're doing something episodic, again, we've talked about episodic storytelling before. That episodic storytelling gives you the ability to, stick with a theme, stick with something that you're really going to change for a little while, or even if it's like a side story thing, you can stick with it. And then you can scrap it. And you say, this didn't work at all, let's move on, or oh, you guys liked how I did that? Perfect. Well, then we're going to go ahead and keep doing that. I liked doing that myself. And, if it brought something more to the game table, keep doing it. The other thing that you should be aware of is you don't want to over focus on correcting a problem. So again, I've talked about how my NPCs probably are not complex enough, or they don't offer the right level of friction. Well, I don't want to overcorrect in having to prep a ton more NPCs, like being like, oh my god, now I'm going to go like way crazy into their personality and everything else about their NPC, everything else about the NPC, and give them backstories and blah blah blah. Because what I'm probably going to end up doing is, one, I'm going to spend a lot of time doing it to try to correct that problem, going to way over focus on it, and then two, I'm going to miss the other stuff that's important to make the game successful. Again, make the game successful first. We often refer to as baking the cake. Bake the cake. Okay, your players like the cake. Your players play in the house that you build. Build it. Okay, make it, and then after you've built it, only then add details to it. Add the trim. Update the kitchen. Add the decorations onto the cake. Do that. That's where you start making your changes. So, and then again, don't, as I said, just don't over focus on it, because the game still has to be successful. So like after you've done that, then I guess you can put as much focus on it as you want to put on it, but understand the payoff and what you're doing there, and how much time you need to focus on that one aspect of the game. And then, explore more over different sessions. Spread out the experience of changing things in your game over different sessions, especially with your blind spots. Just be slow and methodical about it. You don't have to crawl into these different things. And if you are going to change something as a player, let your GM know, hey, I am going to try to do this thing. When Jared is playing his character Rachel, he is expressly stated when he is going to explore a different emotion with Rachel. So his character Rachel was addicted to steroids in our game, and he was going to explore Rachel's rage. So that means that if I got Rachel into a fight, Rachel was going to respond in a violent manner. So I got her into a very, very brutal kind of like bar fight. And I knew that anything I did to push the character, or Jared in that situation, he was going to reply in kind with rage. And he expressed that to me at the beginning of the game. He also expressed to Brian as well. So Brian was like, what the heck is going on here? But it was a big change from the previous game where he had never done anything like that. So I say, be willing to explore it, a little bit at a time, and communicate what you are generally trying to change. If you try to change something as a GM, you don't need to communicate at the beginning of the game. Communicate after the game is over, or after the session is over, and say, hey, I tried this thing. What do you guys think? As a player, communicate to your GM at the beginning of the game, hey, I'm going to try this thing, just so you know. All right? And so that way you don't... that's sort of the symbiosis there between the GM and the player. The players don't need to know necessarily at the beginning of the game what you're going to try, but the GM, as player, you should have a better idea of what you're going to try. Not because your GM is going to be there to say like, ha ha ha, and start twirling their mustache, I'm going to go ahead and screw you over now that you've told me your plan. It's more so the GM can appropriately react to things. If your GM is the type of player who twirls their mustache when you tell them like your plan or your changes for your characters, and they go, I am totally going to screw you over now because you told me this thing at the beginning of our game. That's a bad spot to be a GM. Don't do that if you're a GM. Don't ever do that. Instead, go, all right, thanks for letting me know. I can now react things appropriately. Because your reaction to something they might do, like I said, Jared was exploring his rage in that game as his character Rachel. Had he not told me he was going to do that, I would have been like, oh my God, he is beating someone up. He's breaking a mailbox. Like, you then have to react with the consequences side of things where you're like, this is behavior I don't want in my game. But if the player says, I'm just going to explore it, you might be able to say, okay, I know this is going to happen, so I'm able to react appropriately and, not overreact to something to stop a behavior. Okay. And when you're done with the session, you could then talk to the player like, hey, so what did you think about that? How did, they can say, how did that feel? And your GM can go, okay, listen, I let some things slide today. The reactions from some of the NPCs were lessened today, but if you keep it going, I'm going to have to make sure that the NPCs are going to have a more severe reaction to whatever you're doing. Let the players know that. Let the player know that they're not totally screwed because they decide to make one change, and then vice versa. If you make one change, let the players react appropriately so you don't totally screw up your game by making the changes that you're making under the blind spot topic. And also, the final thing is if you are a player and you want to change things, the best way to change things up as a player is try a different class, race, character, archetype. That is the best way to try and branch out and explore different things as a player and try to cover some of your blind spots. It is tough. If you are a social character, if you like to play the social character, and then suddenly you're playing the bruiser, it is tough. It is really, really tough to change that. And I would say as a player, it is really, really hard because you know what you like to play. And, it's just like if you play, I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring. I have tried a bunch of different builds. I know the ones that I really like. I like this type of build. I like this type of play style. And to try something completely different can feel alien, can feel weird, but it is also rewarding in its own sense. And maybe talk to the entire group as a whole if you're a player and try to get everybody to play something different. So you do have people who are still good at, the skills you're going to need down the road. But anyways, that's some of my thoughts on blind spots, how to deal with them, how to identify them, how to manage them, how to correct them. So if you've got some blind spots that you want to talk about, levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. You can let me know, these are my blind spots. This is how I identify them. This is how I think I can identify my blind spots to the best of our abilities. Obviously, they are blind spots. I'm putting quotations around that. But yeah, let me know. Also, we are on YouTube, or I am on YouTube. This podcast is on YouTube. So smash that like button on YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast there, or, listen to it or recommend it to somebody who doesn't have, or doesn't have one of the other podcast apps out there. I don't know why you wouldn't at this point. I mean, we're on every podcast platform. Come on, people. But anyways, otherwise, subscribe to the podcast in general, review it, recommend it to a friend, all that other good stuff. And that's going to wrap us up for the week. So have a great week, everyone.